Close your eyes and imagine the smell of rain on morning earth, fresh brewed chai, blooming peonies in a well-tended garden. Can you see it? Almost taste it? We use our senses to create home, the place where we feel joy and belonging. In life's journey, what we think of as our home evolves. We build new homes from our dreams, sacrifices, and journeys of miles and years. And for Indianapolis immigrants, home goes by many names. I'm Erica Irish, and in this podcast by the Indianapolis Public Library, we're learning what home means to Indy's immigrant community. Through their diverse lived experiences, we'll see how, rather than exchanging an old home for a new one, immigrants create a powerful new idea that home is so much more than a place. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Whenever you're listening to this, we're so glad to have you again for our next episode of More Than a Place. Today, I am so privileged and honored to welcome Dr. Svitlana Ramer. She is the co-founder of the Ukrainian Society of Indiana, and we're going to be exploring her long journey in cultural recreation, tourism and leisure, and of course, her most recent journey with the Ukrainian Society. Welcome, Dr. Ramer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be here and be able to speak about my own experience and based on some of the research that I've done on Ukrainian diaspora, also on some of the experiences of a larger community of Ukrainians moving to Indiana.
Absolutely. Dr. Ramer, would you like to tell listeners who are you today in 2023? What should they know about you?
I'm an immigrant. I came to the US in 2008. So I actually did my undergraduate work back in Ukraine at the Kyiv National University, the geography department. I studied international tourism, and I thought that, my career aspiration was to take Ukrainian people to other places so they could learn about the world. And then, of course, I was really interested in inbound tourism, specifically bringing foreigners to Ukraine to showcase the beauty of the country. And I actually worked as a tour guide for some time and also worked with the European Student Geography Association. And we welcomed groups of students from European universities studying geography to Ukraine so they could learn hands-on about that part of the world. So, but an opportunity presented itself to apply to a master's program in the United States. It seemed like a very far shot, especially back then. It was like, well, what are the odds that you're going to get in? And I did. I ended up at East Carolina University studying at the Recreation and Leisure Sciences Department, and also took an MBA certificate in their Hospitality Leadership School. So I studied destination image of Ukraine. So kind of following with that thought of like, well, what do foreigners think about my country? And of course, at that time, it was fascinating. Some of the responses I received to my survey were like, people just knew little things from like Russian mafia movies, and they associated that with Ukraine. There was very little distinction between understanding Ukraine as a separate entity from Russia. Nobody will make that mistake ever again.
Right.
And so it was a very, very successful line of study. So my mentor actually advised me to move on to a doctorate program and try to apply to a doctorate program. And so I did. I actually got accepted both into Purdue and Penn State. So I could have ended up in Indiana way earlier.
Earlier, right.
Yeah, like almost 12 years earlier. But the program at Penn State seemed a little bit like a better fit with some of the cultural recreation opportunities. And so I really wanted to go in that direction. And I was very fortunate to have a dissertation chair that was phenomenal and so experienced. And she guided me through my work studying acculturation experiences of fourth wave Ukrainian immigrants in the US and how that affects their travel patterns and their experience of home and going back home after, experiencing the things they have here, adjusting to the society here in the United States. And then I worked in academia for a little bit. I was an assistant professor, an adjunct professor at a couple different universities, moved to Indiana, all roads lead to Indiana,
Yeah.
apparently. Worked in some government roles for the city of Carmel, and then actually 2 days before the invasion, I started at the International Center. And so it was some of the most roller coaster 3 days of my life, because February 22nd was my first day on the job. February 23rd is my birthday. And then on the morning of the 24th, I woke up to a message from my mom: "We are being bombed." And I tried to phone her. I couldn't get a hold of her for a few hours because she was leaving the city and going to a friend's house outside in a suburban area, which was considered a little safer. And in those 2 hours of not being able to get a hold of her, I think I probably lost 2 years off of my lifespan just in stress response. And yesterday was actually the birthday of President Zelensky. And to terrorize Ukraine, Russia did a lot of attacks. And so I actually haven't heard from my mom this morning. I've been calling her and texting her, but they launched 15 missiles into Kyiv, I believe.
And she's still in Kyiv with your grandmother, I read.
She is. Yeah. So I'm just trying to message her and be like, hey, just let me know you're okay. And that is currently the life of every Ukrainian who has a family member anywhere in Ukraine. Nowhere is safe. Of course, the East is worse than the West, but nowhere is truly safe.
Right.
So somebody's day might start with a cup of coffee. Our days start with grabbing our phones and checking in on our families, because they are 7 hours ahead. So by the time we wake up, they're midday. And so we're just trying to make sure they're okay. They're doing fine. We're catching up on the news real quick, making sure, like, were there any attacks while we were asleep? And if yes, trying to get a hold of the family right away. So shortly after starting at the center and the invasion, I got together with some members of the Ukrainian community, and we decided that we needed to start an organization to bring the Ukrainian community of Indiana together, to have opportunities and places to come together, celebrate our culture, raise awareness of what's happening in Ukraine, build cohesion in the community. And so that's how the Ukrainian Society of Indiana was born. And it's been a place of a lot of firsts for Indiana. We hosted Indy's first Ukrainian festival. We obtained the first governor's proclamation recognizing a Ukrainian holiday. We launched the first bilingual story times in Ukrainian and English with Indianapolis Public Library, which is a phenomenal partnership, and we are so appreciative of it. We are about to launch our first Ukrainian adult book club. And we've set up the first Ukrainian sister city with Indiana. So
which city?
We're partnering up Noblesville and Zhytomyr. Excellent. So they're kind of in the process of, the mayors have had a call. The mayor of Zhytomyr actually visited Noblesville. And so that relationship is moving forward. We're now setting up a second and a third one. So we think that the society was founded at the end of March. It's quite a bit.
Right.
So that's where we are today.
Right. And as you mentioned, it's really a radical shift from where Americans' understanding stood of Ukraine several years ago. Unfortunately, it took this very desperate moment to introduce Americans to Ukraine. What stands out to you as this shift is occurring? What are some things that people may not totally understand about Ukraine as it shows up in the news due to the invasion? What do you hope to help people understand about Ukrainian culture and life?
It's really interesting to look back at some of the results of my master's thesis back in 2008 on destination image of Ukraine. And of course, one of the biggest things was that even at that time, since 1991, Ukraine has been independent from USSR. However, Ukraine has been attempting to gain independence the past 600 years. It's just that the powers in the East, the Muscovy, the Russian Empire, then the USSR, wouldn't let it. And then the powers in the West, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ukraine's always been kind of divvied up because it is such a lucrative piece of land.
Right.
It has some of the best soil in Europe. It is very strategically, geopolitically located with trade routes and connections for energy resources, east, west, north, south. It's always been a very, very prominent land for transportation, kind of very similar to Indiana in that regard.
Yeah.
You know how we say we're the crossroads of America? Ukraine is really the crossroads of Europe, between Europe and Asia. And so that's kind of been the blessing and the curse for the majority of our history.
Right.
And to understand the amount of hardship that people there have endured in the past 600 years trying to win their independence, with the Cossacks in the 1700s, with the Ukrainian rebellious army in the late 1800s and early 1900s. When the Russian Empire fell apart, that was one of the biggest moments where Ukraine felt like it finally had a chance to become independent. And for 1 year, the Ukrainian People's Republic was an independent nation. And then the Bolsheviks swept in, killed off all the people who were fighting for independence. Terrible repressions were happening. The famine genocide of 1932-1933 that Stalin orchestrated, that killed off somewhere between 7 to 12 million ethnic Ukrainians. And then those lands, especially in the east and south, where most people perished, were resettled. Those empty villages, they just brought in people from the Far East, from Russia. So when people talk about, well, you know, it's very complicated, people in the east of Ukraine are Russian speaking, they're very pro-Russian. Well, they're the descendants of people from Russia who were resettled in the lands where ethnic Ukrainians were starved to death. So yeah, they speak Russian and they feel affinity with Russia, but not for any sort of good reason, in my opinion. So I think something that we've observed since the start of the invasion, you know, when Russia first started the process, everybody gave Ukraine 3 days, 72 hours, Kyiv will fall. There are stories, you know, whether that's true or not, that the ambassador of Ukraine in Germany was asking for help and basically was told, you guys have no chance. We're not going to even try anything. You have 3 days. And then what the world witnessed, which blew its mind, was Ukrainian people's resistance to the invasion, right? Teenagers in Kyiv making thousands of bottles of Molotov cocktail and throwing them at the Russian tanks. People laying down on the ground with their bare bodies in villages to stop tanks and other vehicles, other infantry vehicles from coming in. And people couldn't understand what is happening. But that's because people don't know the 600 years of history, of repressions, of terror, of abuse, of genocide on the part of Russia towards Ukraine. And so when they finally made this big step and big move to erase us off of the face of the earth, the whole country stood up. So I think one of the biggest impressions and sort of memories of that time was how shocked the world was at Ukraine's response, and how Ukrainians were, no, this is existential. And people in varying forms, on the military front, on the cultural front, on the language front, on the diplomacy front, Ukraine has been resisting and trying to withstand Russia for hundreds of years. Centuries. And this war itself started in 2014. Let's not forget that Russia annexed Crimea and entered their military into the eastern region, into the Donbass, in 2014. So that, I think that was the biggest thing, where we were like, why are you all so surprised?
Yeah.
You just don't know us that well. You don't know what we've been up against for hundreds of years, for generations.
Mm. Thank you for offering that overview. It's obviously there's a lot of self-education people should explore, and but that is an excellent starting point. I appreciate you introducing listeners to that if they're not familiar. You grew up in Fastiv, Ukraine, in central Ukraine. And if I read correctly, it was you were born the year after, very close to when the USSR dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
How did these centuries of tension between the two countries impact your childhood, impact you growing up? When did you first begin to realize and see that?
So I was born in 1918. Wow. 1987. No, thank you.
You look great for your age.
Right. It's all that yoga and
Yes.
green juicing. So 1987, and then the USSR fell apart officially, and Ukraine voted for its independence in 1991. So I was almost 4. And so by the time I sort of went to school and became very aware of things, it was, we were a few years into Ukraine's independence. I do remember that those early times when there was so much chaos, right? Because you had this one big conglomerate, and then it just kind of fell apart. And Ukraine, the economic situation was very unstable. And I remember my parents being very stressed out about that. I could sort of feel that tension of making sure everybody had work and that kind of stuff. Because what leaders of the USSR did purposely for 70 years is tie these countries with economic processes. So if there was a process of making steel, they would take the ore in one country, then ship it to another country. Instead of refining it on site, they would build a refinery in another one of the Soviet republics. So then once things fell apart, those chains of just economic production, they started breaking apart. And it was very challenging to sort of recreate these processes. And Ukraine went through several rounds of different currencies before figuring out what was the appropriate. So like they would introduce a currency and then it would just devalue immediately and crash, and they had to kind of do another one. So I actually remember having stacks. They were called coupons, or I don't know really how to translate it, but we just had stacks of those because that was the currency that got devalued and was going away. And I was just making paper planes out of it and just playing with it as just pieces of paper. Wow. Like it was no longer money. And then eventually Ukraine moved over to hryvnia, which is sort of one of the traditional historic currencies back when Ukraine was independent under the Cossacks. And so that's the currency that we have now. But I have that memory. But then by the time I went to kindergarten and then to school, Ukraine was independent and the system of education has adjusted. So in school, we spoke Ukrainian. So I'm really comfortable speaking Ukrainian, reading Ukrainian, whereas somebody of my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation who only studied in Russian, they understand the language, they can speak it. It's a little bit more challenging. Some of the words that slip through might be more Russified than something that I would do. And actually, I just came back from a trip, visiting my family, delivering some humanitarian aid, and I brought some family photos back. I asked my mom if I could take some, and so I could have them here. And there's a picture of me in the kindergarten. We had like a little holiday celebration of some sort, and the kids were putting on a concert for their parents. And we were singing traditional Ukrainian songs and acting them out. And so I have a photo of myself dressed in a Ukrainian embroidered shirt with a flower crown with ribbons, in a skirt, and a Ukrainian scarf over my shoulders. So portraying a traditional Ukrainian outfit, which would have been not something that would have been appropriate or really promoted or encouraged when my mom was my age. And so then getting into first grade, and then going through elementary, middle, high school, I had a phenomenal history teacher, and she really dove deep into some of these processes and causalities between some of the things that were happening. Explained to us about the Cossacks and the freedom movement in Ukraine in the 18 and 1900s, and the repressions that the Bolsheviks had against the people who were trying to work towards independent Ukraine. And my grandma's second husband actually was a member of OUN, which is sort of a Ukrainian rebellious army or Ukrainian nationalist movement. And he was arrested and he was sent to a labor camp in Russia and was there for 10 years working in the mines. And once he's done his time, he was allowed to come back to Ukraine. And he actually continued that work, even after giving 10 years of his life to just deplorable conditions of a northern Russian labor camp. That did not break him. He came back and went right back to what he was doing for what he was imprisoned.
More Than a Place is made possible by the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund through a grant to the Indianapolis Public Library Foundation. What else do you remember about Fastiv? So we talked about the history, this very clear shift where just the generation before you, people are being arrested, livelihoods threatened, and worse for speaking their minds. As far as the scenery, the people around you, what do you remember about Fastiv?
So Fastiv is a small town, and it was really interesting. We had a lot of freedom there. It was back at the time when you had to either pick up the landline and call your friend and see if they would want to come out and play, or you actually went there and knocked on the door, and the parents would open up and you're like, "Can such and such come out to play?" So we really didn't have. Back when I was very young, we still had a TV where you had to get off the couch and go change the channel by pressing a different button. So of course, the youngest one in the family was the living remote. You go change the channel. So life was a lot simpler. I went to school. I came home. I had my dinner. I did my homework. I went out to play with friends. The summers were amazing. I was able to. Since my grandparents were divorced, I mostly stayed with my grandma. But then on the weekends, I really loved going to my grandpa because my grandma lived in an apartment. My grandpa had a private home close to a river. There was a river flowing through Fastiv called Unava. And we would go to the beach and we would just, play in the river. And my mom would always say that you would sit in that water till your lips got purple. You just could not be, like, we could not drag you out of the water. And so I had, a lot of friends. We would walk around. We would do. It's really fascinating to me, the things we would play with and things we would entertain ourselves with. So we would take toothpicks, and then we'd take flowers and put the flowers and toothpicks to make clothing, and we would play with those dolls, and or we would go and collect different types of plants and then kind of mash them with like a mortar and pestle, and then put them in a jar and put water in and see what different colors came out. So to me, it's very different from, for example, seeing even now in Ukraine, like going to a place somewhere and seeing how every little kid has an iPad in front of them, so they would enter, be occupied with something.
Mm.
We managed to occupy ourselves with very, very simple things. And that's probably the reason why to this day I use technology when I have to. I check my email. Obviously, I work in a nonprofit. I'm tied to my emails all day and doing a lot of that kind of stuff. But a lot of my leisure has nothing to do with technology, just because I'm so used to that and I crave that whenever I'm exposed. Like once I get home, I'm very resistant to opening up my computer. I fit everything I need to do during my time at work. And so trying to go hiking and things like that, just because I spent so much time outside as a kid, just playing with sticks,
Yeah.
playing with flowers. One of the biggest adventures was always going to the other side of the town, which, was sort of like a kilometer away. It wasn't that far. Again,
Not
it's a
too
small
far.
town.
Yeah.
But to me, to the little kid, it seemed like it was like the other side of the world.
Yeah.
It's actually going to the bookstore. I
Oh,
couldn't afford to buy anything, but I just stood there and looked and like took books off the bookshelf and like opened them up and looked through them. I'm pretty sure the salesperson at the bookstore probably like hated me with passion. Just so annoying. This kid comes in, never buys anything, always like touches all the books and looks through all the books with their dirty little fingers. So I'm grateful to them, whoever that person is. I don't remember even what they looked like, but I'm grateful to them for their patience and not kicking me out and just letting me. I mean, I wasn't creating any trouble, but I was just quietly standing there and like I might even like just stand there and just read a few pages. It's like, just because it was so interesting to me. So those are some of the brightest memories that I have. We walked everywhere. When I went to kindergarten, I walked there. When we went to school, I walked there. So by myself, it was pretty safe. It was okay to do so. So it was definitely, a very it was a pretty happy childhood. And then it was when I was in fifth grade that we moved to the capital, and that was definitely um, much more overwhelming because a lot of public transportation, the size of the city, and going to a new school. But yeah, my memories of Fastiv are mostly those of spending a lot of time in nature, walking everywhere, playing with friends,
yeah.
entertaining ourselves with very simple things.
Simple
Yeah.
pleasures. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That has me reminiscing a lot too. Also, I mean, I'm in the weird generation where it's like iPads, things of that sort were being introduced, but I still remember growing up and spending most of my time outside. And it changes you. It changes how you spend your time as an adult, I think, and what you value, as you said. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Ramer, where do you consider home to be today, and what makes it home for you?
The thing is, with moving to the United States as a fully fledged adult at 21, that age of relocation carries a lot of weight in your sort of feeling and sensation of home. So for me, home is always Ukraine. It always will be. I do know from my own experience and from conversations with some other people that their sense of Ukrainianness was greatly heightened with the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Even if we just kind of went about our lives and we're really entrenched in our American day-to-day things, and Ukraine has definitely come to the forefront a lot more. But even if it hadn't, it's always my family is still there. So Ukraine is always home. Ukrainian language is always the native language, because, like I said, by the time I moved here, and I was already in the United States when the Revolution of Dignity happened, the Euromaidan. If you haven't seen Netflix Winter on Fire, you absolutely must. It talks about those events in 2013 and 2014. when those protests that erupted when the president at the time was trying to move away from the European vector for Ukraine and go back to being closer with Russia, and people went out to peaceful protest. And the president actually had the police open fire at the protesters. And so that just kind of erupted into a big thing. And that president was ousted because people wouldn't go away. But that's when that triggered Russia's annexation of Crimea and the start of the war in the Donbass. So I wasn't there. I was already living in the United States, but the Orange Revolution in 2004, when there was a pro-Russian president and a pro-European president, and there was massive fraud in the elections, and the pro-Russian president won, and people flooded the main square and stood there, peaceful protests, chants, concerts, just demanding the recounting of the votes. And the votes were recounted and the pro-European president took seat. So I was a freshman in college, and we were participating in those protests. So we had kind of shifts that we had a little spot for the students from our department with a flag. And so we just took shifts going out there. And then a friend of mine and myself, it was winter time, we went out with big things of hot tea, and we would make sandwiches at home and go out there and give people sandwiches. So having been a part of that, of that initial push toward of Ukrainian people really standing up for their desire towards the European vector of development and their desire to show that we will not be silenced. Like it's a democracy, and we will show you what a democracy is and what the will of the people can do. And we won't let just corrupt elites dictate who our president is going to be. Having been a part of that historic junction in European history, it also ties you very closely to this entire situation, because it started then. Like this big, massive thing that's happening right now. Yes, there's 600 of kind of background leading up to it, but the Orange Revolution of 2004, where people really were able to make a difference and say, no, you will not be our president. We will not stand this election fraud and corruption. And then the Revolution of Dignity in 2013 was an even bigger show of people's will, of you can't just take a peaceful protest and open fire on people hoping to silence them.
Right.
We will come out in force. So yeah, Ukraine is always home, and I'm very proud of my home, of what it's showing to the world. So I'm really hoping that I can sort of perpetuate that down the generations as well.
Thank you. And those are some very significant values that the Ukrainian people have been defending over and over and over again. For you personally, what does the word home represent? What feelings, values, when you name a place a home, what does it represent?
It's first and foremost a sensation of belonging, of being understood, a sensation of comfort. There's a song that's really popular right now in Ukraine, and I actually have a pin that has that phrase. It says, as in Ukrainian says, Kyiv це дома, навіть якщо дома не Kyiv. It translates into Kyiv is home, even if home is not Kyiv. So wherever you are in the world, right, Kyiv is home. And so that's a place where I go and I just feel such a sense of emotional elevation from being there, from walking those streets, that history, that knowledge of what our people have had to go through. Every corner of that city is steeped in so much history. My favorite place in Kyiv is the Saint Sophia Cathedral. It dates back to the 11th century.
Wow.
Right. And there's so much history behind its creation, and how even during World War II, when Nazis bombed most of Kyiv, that one somehow was left
Survived.
standing.
Yeah.
And so that's a place where like everywhere you look, you see history, you see your roots, you see the people who've come before you and what they have been able to accomplish. And it gives you a desire to continue that and to do better, to build upon that foundation. In Kyiv, if you dig down into the ground, you'll find layers and layers, like the archaeologists call them the cultural layers. Well, those go hundreds of feet deep, because Kyiv was founded in 5th century. So that's home. That's the place where so many of my ancestors have lived.
Wow. 5th century. That's Middle Ages. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first mention of Moscow in any sort of documents actually goes back to 1147. So it just cracks me up so much every time that the Russian government is like, Russia is the mother of or whatever, the ancient country, that and Ukraine is just like a little part of it. It's like,
no,
y'all, Kyiv has been around when Moscow was like a little bog in the woods. I'm sorry, but archaeology just doesn't line up with your propaganda.
Yeah. It's fascinating. What kind of food or drink feels like home to you when you consume it?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I'm very fortunate, actually. My mom, she works as an accountant now, but she actually went to cooking school for her higher education.
It's amazing.
In Kharkiv, in the northern Ukrainian city, there was a Kharkiv Institute of basically like a culinary institute. So she's an incredible cook. So this is really interesting. When I lived, before my mom moved us to Kyiv, she would go there for the week to work and come back on the weekend. So I stayed with my grandma. And after school, when I would come back, she would always feed me. And one of the things she would do, if she made mashed potatoes, she would, give me some and then save some up for the next day. And so we didn't have microwaves, of course, at the time. So the way to reheat the mashed potatoes was put a little butter in her cast iron skillet and throw the mashed potatoes in there and just heat them up. But that butter with the mashed potatoes would create a little crust. Like, think of a Parmesan crisp, but out of a mashed potato, like crispy mashed potato layer. And that was so good.
Sounds
it's
good.
A very specific thing. Like, a lot of people don't like mashed potatoes that have been reheated in the skillet. But that little crust of buttery, crispy mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Do you make it?
No. I nuke everything in the microwave.
Oh.
Unfortunately. Maybe I should look into that. But one of the things that I have in my fridge right now is the salo, which is traditionally Ukrainian. It's kind of like bacon, but it's more fat than meat, and you just kind of put it on bread, and it's a big delicacy. So that, and then my grandma would make me it's called kysil. It's a fruit, like gelatiny type beverage, where basically you make like fruit, boil it in the water, but then add a little bit of either cornstarch or arrowroot powder to thicken it. It's not, I guess it's not like a jello. It's still liquid, but it's thick. And that's a form of a dessert, and it's really good. So she would make that for me as well. So those were like my two big favorites.
Are there different flavors, or is there one primary?
You can do cherry. The one that she would make the most would be cherry. It would have the most pronounced flavor, and it's really good. And you can buy them even now from like a packet. But my grandma would actually make it from scratch. She would take like cherry preserves or cherry compote and add a little bit of water and then add the thickener to it. And it's kind of labor intensive because you have to whisk it constantly to break up the clumps. But the one made from scratch is way better than the one, like the instant one from the packet.
As with so many things. That sounds interesting and delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tasty.
What smells remind you of home?
So my this one is pretty good for me. I use a lot of essential oils, and so I'm a really smell oriented person. And the smell that I love the most is jasmine. And so my grandpa actually had a jasmine bush growing down the street, not too far from his home. And anytime I would go visit him, which would always be such a fun thing because, grandparents, it was different because I lived with grandma for quite some time. It was almost more of a parental type dynamic. But with grandpa, that's when you go to that's where you go to have fun.
Yeah.
The river
no
is
rules.
there. No rules. He lives close to the river. He doesn't live in an apartment. He lives in a private home. So there's a lot of woods right behind there to explore and run around. So like that's like, and then grandpa would also make, he had rabbits at one point, and he would make rabbit stew, which was also delicious. So when I would go there in the summer, I would walk. It was a pretty long walk, but again, you walked everywhere. On the right side going there was a big jasmine bush. And I loved the smell so much. And I would just be walking by and kind of bury my face in that bush for a few moments and take a few deep breaths and then keep going to grandpa's.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hello, everyone. It's Erica, and you're listening to our latest episode of More Than a Place, a podcast by the Indianapolis Public Library, produced in partnership with Kendall Antron of the Made in Indy podcast. We couldn't tell the unforgettable stories of our community without your support. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us. To learn more about Indy immigrant leaders like Dr. Ramer, visit IndyPL.org/morethanAplace. Thanks for listening.